We've heard a lot about how the industrial food system makes us unhealthy, makes us obese, etc. Well, I think these elections have proven that it makes us insane too. Well, on public radio the other day, Neil Conan had his political junkie with him, and somebody called in and says, well, why aren't the politicians in the media talking about the environment? And Neil Conan says, I think she said, why aren't the media talking about the environment? And the other guy says, I don't know, I think she said the politicians aren't talking about the environment. And since they couldn't agree, they just dropped the issue. That was it. Now, so is this really any way to run a country? No, so we shouldn't be surprised that our agricultural system is being run for the benefit of the 1%, just like everything else and just like our media. I've been to many other foreign countries visiting other farmers in our international coalition of farmers and peasants and fishers and farm workers called Via Campesina. And I was in Central America, and so we're sitting around with farmers from all the Central American countries, and I asked them, well, you've been through revolutions and you've had peace agreements. I said, how are things going? And they said, well, they're not shooting us right now. And I said, well, what about your government? Are they, being responsive to your needs? And they go, oh, forget it. We've got a two-party system just like you do. They said, on the one hand, we've got a party that represents the old aristocracy that owns all the land, and then we've got this other party that's more into the modern free trade stuff and technology, and they take money from the drug cartels. And they said the drug cartels don't want farmers to prosper because then farmers wouldn't raise drugs for them. Now, this World Food Prize, as Frank says, is really the World Food Corporate Prize, and it was established by Norman Borlaug, an Iowa native. And he's considered to be the father of the Green Revolution. And his intention was to breed crops so that they would withstand the rigors of applying lots of herbicide or lots of fertilizer to them so they would yield great, but they wouldn't fall down. And that process still goes on. When I, as a farmer, go to pick a seed corn number, I want to know that it's going to yield well, but I also want to know that it's not going to fall down. So a lot of my neighbors that have bought the GMO crops, well, it might yield, but they don't really know because it fell down. So, yeah, even though you would have thought that it would have stood up because it's killing all the insects that are chewing on it, it still fell down because it still had weaknesses. They got blindsided by Monsanto and Pioneer. So everything these companies are trying to sell you aren't going to live up to their promises. And I'll tell you a story about that later. But through the years, this idea of increasing yields has been generalized to all kinds of technology that they have to sell, especially those that they like to patent, like herbicides and genetically modified crops. The Green Revolution, though, fully ignored the role of democratic policy. So the Green Revolution avoided ecological and social costs or ensuring that food production and food producers would remain part and vital to their society and culture. And they call this, of course, this policy market-oriented policy. The market is supposed to deal with everything. Of course, we know that corporations, they only have one purpose, and that's to maximize the profits. And if they can get away with all of the other concerns that I mentioned, they will. From the perspective of family farmers and peasants who revere food sovereignty, sustainable democratic food policy that respects ecology, culture, and diversity of economic opportunity offers a lot more than simply what the World Food Prize talks about, which is quality, quantity, and availability of food. And you'll notice that the World Food Prize award is made by an anonymous committee. In South America, they call corporations Society Anonymous, Sociedades Anonimo, right? Right, yeah, because they're anonymous associations. They don't misrepresent what they really are. And so we've experienced urbanization, deterioration of rural communities, and industrialized agriculture as a result of their policy or lack of policy that we've had in this country to support family farmers and to protect the environment. And as I've gone around the world, I'm surprised how other farmers have been in the same boat. But what's really scary is that here in this country, right here in Iowa, here we have hog confinements destroying our communities, polluting the water and the air. And do people in Iowa understand what's wrong, or that what we're experiencing now is a product of the Green Revolution? No, they don't. Either that, if they do, they feel totally helpless. And at the same time, while we're battling those factory farms in our communities, the same politicians that ignore that problem, or the CEOs that profit from those big CAFOs, or selling the seeds so we can raise so much corn and soybeans to feed those, they're over there front and center, both Democrats and Republicans. Agribusiness trade groups and their politicians like to spout the idea that Iowa farmers feed the world. But you know that's not the case, because all we raise is corn and soybeans. People don't eat corn and soybeans generally. Less than 1% of the soybeans in this country is fed to human beings, and most of the corn is either fed to livestock or made into biofuel like gasohol. And poor people, people that are hungry, can't afford any of those things. So we know that we're not increasing food production in this state using genetically modified crops to feed poor people. So when these new technologies that we develop here go into other countries, they're not going to be feeding poor people. Poor farmers are not going to be using those technologies. Big corporations are in their land grabs like Rastetter and Agrosol, and they're going to bulldoze the landscape, the natural landscape, and they're going to bulldoze rural communities and traditional cultures in the process. And they're going to just add to the big global pile of corn and soybeans to feed more livestock and more great big huge CAFOs and feedlots, and produce more biofuels so the people in the richest countries of the world and the richest people in those countries can drive their cars and eat meat, milk, and eggs. So this is why food sovereignty is so important. I've been wanting to make this a household word for a long time. Food sovereignty means that we recognize that we, the people, make important decisions through our democratic governments, letting our societies become everyone for him or herself means that multinational corporations will rule the world. Food sovereignty does not just subscribe to the old nationalistic notions, but it strives to empower citizens to make important decisions about their land, how their land is used, how their food is produced and processed, while respecting other people, other cultures, and the beautiful world that we all depend on. Now, a funny thing happened to me the other day on the way to the Farm Progress show. A neighbor called me on my cell phone. He wanted to know what kind of corn I had growing along the road because it looked so good. Now, he wasn't surprised that it was non-GMO corn, because he knows that I would not ever raise GMO corn. But nevertheless, he admired it, and he wanted to know what kind it was, and I'm hoping a lot of my neighbors recognize it, and they'll raise non-GMO corn. So that proves that you don't have to raise GMO corn to raise a respectable crop of corn. And in fact, these herbicide-resistant varieties like Roundup Ready, and now they've got a whole bunch of other ones, they do kill the weeds initially, but they also, what they do is they weed out farmers, because they increase the competition between farmers so much, and they make it so possible to actually farm without farmers. The competition on cash rent will be so intense that unless you're willing to raise corn on corn continuously, unless you're willing to ignore all of the concerns that we have about our land and our water and our air, you'll be out of the picture. You'll be out of the race. It'll go to either another farmer who thinks they're going to farm like a corporation, or before long, an actual corporation. We're going to have to recognize that democracy is going to require a foundation of food sovereignty. And that we can make food sovereignty that foundation, and we can make it the foundation of our foreign policy too. And instead of having politicians get up and talk about how I'm going to create 12 million jobs without ever indicating how they're going to do it, we're going to have one of our leaders get up and say, I'm going to help create 12 million new sustainable farms. Instead of quibbling about whether food stamp recipients deserve or are worthy of getting food stamps, we're all going to get food stamps. And those food stamps, we'll be able to turn them in and get a discount on our food more if they're raised locally and if they're raised organically. Yeah. So that's our agenda for food sovereignty, and thank you for coming, and thank you for